By the summer of 1943, General George S. Patton was already considered one of America's fiercest and most capable battlefield commanders. His success in North Africa had turned him into something of a legend among Allied troops, admired for his aggressive tactics, his booming speeches, and his unwavering belief in the offensive spirit of war. When the Allies moved into Sicily, Patton's 7th Army raced across the island with remarkable speed, often outpacing even British forces under Montgomery. The newspapers back home were filled with headlines about his bold advances and his colorful character. But that very fire that made Patton such an effective combat leader also carried the seeds of trouble. During the Sicilian campaign, 2 incidents occurred that would forever shadow his reputation. In separate field hospitals, he struck 2 soldiers who were suffering from battle fatigue, calling them cowards in front of other patients and staff. At the time, combat stress was poorly understood, and Patton viewed fear as a weakness that could spread like a disease through an army. His intention, perhaps, was to enforce discipline, but his actions were cruel and publicly humiliating. When word of the slapping incidents reached the press, and then Washington, the reaction was explosive. Public outrage was fierce, and senior military and political leaders were alarmed that one of their most prominent generals had displayed such uncontrolled temper. General Eisenhower, who valued Patton's abilities deeply, realized he could not simply overlook it. He reprimanded Patton sharply, demanding a public apology and effectively sidelining him from immediate command. Patton, humiliated and deeply frustrated, delivered his apology to the men he had struck and to his units. But the damage to his image was done. Though he retained his rank, he lost his immediate combat command and was told to stand down while the Allies planned the next great step, the invasion of northern France. It was during these months of planning for Operation Overlord that the question arose: who would command the U.S. forces in the most important invasion of the war? Many soldiers assumed it would be Patton, the most battle-tested general the Americans had. But events had made that impossible. When the Allied High Command began choosing leaders for the Normandy invasion, Patton's name was considered but quietly set aside. Eisenhower needed someone who could not only fight, but also work smoothly within a complex, multinational coalition. The D-Day operation required coordination with the British, Canadians, and Free French forces, all under enormous political and military scrutiny. Eisenhower and his senior planners concluded that Patton, for all his brilliance on the battlefield, was too unpredictable and too controversial at that moment to be the public face of such an operation. The memory of the slapping scandal was still fresh, and there were fears that giving him the top role might provoke political backlash or even damage public confidence in the invasion if his temper flared again. Instead, the command of the U.S. forces for the initial landings went to General Omar Bradley, a calm, thoughtful officer who had served under Patton in North Africa and Sicily. Bradley lacked Patton's flamboyance, but possessed the steady temperament and cooperative spirit Eisenhower trusted for the delicate first phase of the operation. Patton, meanwhile, found himself in an odd limbo. He was too valuable to discard, his experience and fame were unmatched, but too controversial to place at the center of the D-Day command. Eisenhower and the Allied planners devised a clever use for him. They placed Patton in command of a fictitious army group, the 1st U.S. Army Group, based in southeastern England. This unit was part of a vast deception scheme, Operation Fortitude, designed to fool German intelligence into believing the Allies would land not in Normandy, but in the Pas-de-Calais region. The Germans, who respected and feared Patton above any other American commander, assumed that wherever he was, the main attack would follow. To reinforce the illusion, fake radio traffic, dummy tanks, wooden aircraft, and inflatable vehicles were spread across the English countryside. Patton himself made highly visible public appearances, inspecting non-existent troops and giving interviews, all to strengthen the illusion. His very fame became a weapon of deception. In a twist of irony, Patton's sidelining from D-Day command turned him into a central figure in one of the most successful deception operations of the entire war. As the summer of 1944 approached, Patton watched from the sidelines as Bradley, Montgomery, and Eisenhower prepared for the invasion. On June 6, D-Day finally came. The beaches of Normandy ran red with the blood of thousands of Allied soldiers, and for several tense weeks the outcome remained uncertain. Patton, chafing at his enforced inactivity, knew that once the beachhead was secure, he would be called back into real command. And so, in August 1944, his moment returned. He was given command of the newly activated U.S. Third Army. When that order came, Patton threw himself into it with characteristic ferocity. His forces broke out of Normandy hedgerows in a matter of days, sweeping across France in a lightning advance that stunned both the Germans and his own allies. His tanks rolled faster than supplies could reach them, and his drive toward the German border became legendary. Ironically, the very qualities that made Eisenhower hesitant to let him lead the invasion, his aggressiveness, his impatience with caution, his relentless drive, were exactly what made him so effective once the war turned mobile. As Third Army commander, Patton liberated vast stretches of France and was instrumental in relieving the besieged town of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge later that winter. His soldiers idolized him for his energy and leadership, even as other generals occasionally found him abrasive. Patton himself privately believed that his exclusion from D-Day was a grave injustice. He felt he'd been punished too harshly for the Sicily incident, and often confided to friends that he could have ended the war even sooner had he been allowed to leave from the beginning. Yet even he admitted that the deception role he played had been vital, since it tied down German divisions that might otherwise have reinforced Normandy. As the war pressed deeper into 1945, George S. Patton's star once again blazed across Europe. His Third Army, having swept from Normandy through France and across the Rhine, became a symbol of relentless forward motion. The soldiers under his command moved so fast and struck so hard that the Germans often referred to them as ghost divisions, appearing out of nowhere, breaking through lines, and vanishing again before a counterattack could form. His tactics were instinctive and daring, based on mobility, surprise, and the refusal ever to stop. In Patton's mind, momentum itself was a weapon. He believed that a commander's spirit could drive an army forward just as much as bullets and tanks. Wherever he went, his men knew they were expected to advance, never retreat. But beneath that furious drive, Patton never fully forgot that he had been denied the greatest command of all, the leadership of the D-Day invasion. To him, Normandy represented the defining moment of the war, and not being allowed to take that stage felt like a wound that never quite healed. Though he performed magnificently afterward, he often reflected bitterly in his diary that he could have led the landings better, faster, and with fewer losses. Privately, he blamed politics and fear of controversy more than strategy. Still, he could not ignore that his own actions, those brief, disastrous slapping incidents in Sicily, had set the whole chain of events in motion. In later years, Patton admitted to close friends that he had been wrong, that he had let pride and anger rule him at that moment. But he also believed that his punishment had been greater than the crime. When the war in Europe finally ended, Patton's Third Army stood deep inside Germany. His men had liberated thousands of square miles of territory and countless prisoners from Nazi camps. His columns had driven farther and faster than any other American army on the continent. Yet victory brought Patton no peace. Instead of resting, he grew restless. He clashed with his superiors over how to treat the defeated Germans and warned that the Soviet Union would soon become America's next great enemy. His bluntness and refusal to temper his words made him as controversial in peacetime as he had been in war. Once again, his mouth, the same mouth that inspired soldiers on the eve of battle, became his undoing. Within months of victory, he was relieved of his command in Germany. Still, for all the turbulence of his career, history has not forgotten that it was George S. Patton's drive, intensity, and vision that helped break the German army's spine. In a sense, his sidelining from D-Day was both tragedy and necessity. Tragedy, because it denied him the glory he so craved and the opportunity to lead the war's most historic assault. Necessity, because it allowed the Allies to use his fame as a weapon of deception and ensure that the invasion itself was conducted under calmer leadership suited to the immense diplomatic and logistical burden it carried. The truth is that the D-Day operation required not just bravery and audacity, but an almost administrative precision, a steady, unflinching patience that Patton's temperament might have struggled to sustain under the political weight of coalition warfare. And yet, had Patton led the D-Day assault, the history of the war might have looked very different. Perhaps it would have been bloodier. Perhaps it would have been faster. Perhaps his iron would have driven the Allies deeper into France before the Germans could recover. We will never know. What we do know is that when his chance came again, Patton made good on every ounce of faith that Eisenhower and the high command had once placed in him. He became the embodiment of speed and power, the general whose troops believed no enemy could stop them once they were moving. His name struck fear into German headquarters and pride into American hearts. In the months following victory, Patton often visited the cemeteries where his soldiers lay buried. Standing among the rows of white crosses, he spoke quietly to them, sometimes alone, sometimes with aides, promising that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. Those who saw him there describe a man both proud and haunted. Proud of what his men had done, haunted by what he himself had lost. His sidelining from D-Day had changed him. It had taught him, perhaps too late, that greatness in war was not only about victory, but also about restraint, timing, and humility. Then, in December 1945, just months after the war's end, fate took its final turn. Patton was injured in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany. He survived for nearly 2 weeks, paralyzed and reflective, knowing that his end was near. He told the few who visited his bedside that he regretted nothing except dying in bed instead of on the battlefield. When he died, the world mourned a soldier who was both hero and contradiction, brilliant yet volatile, disciplined yet reckless, loved and feared in equal measure. And so, the story comes full circle. The man who was once sidelined from the greatest invasion in history still found a way to shape that invasion's success through deception, inspiration, and later, redemption on the open fields of Europe. His fire burned too brightly to fit neatly within the cautious politics of high command. But without that fire, the Allied armies might have advanced less boldly, fought less fiercely, and ended the war more slowly. George S. Patton's legacy is therefore one of paradox. The sideline general who still helped in the war, the punished commander whose punishment became his path to legend. In the end, he proved that being set aside from one moment of glory does not erase greatness. Sometimes, history remembers not the man who leads the first charge, but the one who drives the final victory home, and Patton did exactly that.